Good afternoon. My name is Colette Watson, and welcome to Free Press Live, a weekly news show from Free Press, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan media reform advocacy organization with more than 1 million members across the U.S. fighting for communications rights. You can learn more about our work at freepress.net, but today we're going to talk about 1 year ago, the federal government declared a state of emergency in the COVID-19 pandemic. And internet rights advocates Leo Fitzpatrick and Dana Floberg, my colleagues here at Free Press, are going to join us to discuss what that declaration meant for broadband and other utility expenses and what they're asking Congress to do now. But first, news. Advocates, elected officials, a coalition of racial justice and platform accountability organizations joined members of Congress on this Tuesday to demand that Facebook fix its Spanish language content moderation gap. With the hashtag #YaBastaFacebook, which translates to enough Facebook, advocates said that this crisis is pushing extreme disinformation and hate to Spanish-speaking communities in the United States. Participants included Free Press, the Center for American Progress, the National Hispanic Media Coalition, and the Real Facebook Oversight Board. Brenda Victoria Castillo, president and CEO of the National Hispanic Media Coalition, said, Facebook continues to ignore our concerns and is making one thing perfectly clear. The safety and dignity of the Latinx community is not their priority. If you'd like to view the emergency virtual briefing that advocates held via YouTube, we invite you to check out the link, which we'll put below in the contents. Make sure to follow that conversation on Twitter via the hashtag #YaBastaFacebook. In other news, Representative James Clyburn of South Carolina, my home state, introduced the Accessible Affordable Internet for All Act on last Thursday. He first unveiled this legislation last June, and the House of Representatives passed it in July as part of the Moving Forward Act. This year, the AAIA is expected to move in tandem with broader infrastructure proposals emanating from the House as well as the Biden administration. And the lead sponsor of the Senate companion bill is Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota. Free Press Action's Vice President of Policy and General Counsel Matt Wood said that this landmark broadband package is just as necessary as ever. It builds on the passage of the emergency broadband benefit in the December stimulus bill and the emergency connectivity fund for remote learning included in the American Rescue Plan passed just this week. The AAIA supplements and extends the funding for both of those vital programs. And finally, March 15th, just a few days ago, marked 1 year since the sunset of Section 215 of the Patriot Act. Advocates are calling on activists to join them in telling lawmakers no more Patriot Act and no more spying on people without a warrant. You can visit stopthepatriotact.org to view the recent panel discussion on this, which was facilitated by our colleagues Lucia Martinez and Sandy Fulton in their ongoing fight against unjust surveillance. But now I want to turn to our special guests for today, Leo Fitzpatrick and Dana Floberg, who again are my colleagues here at Free Press and are policy experts, especially in the area of broadband accessibility. Leo, Dana, how are you today?
Still here.
I'm still here, and thanks for having me on. I'm a huge fan of the show, and it's not just because we're colleagues. I think you and Vanessa are doing stellar, amazing work. So look forward to continuing to watch at 2:30s, right? Every Wednesday. And yeah, so still kicking, and it's always hard to talk about how one's doing in a pandemic, but I think the work, very important work we all do here at Free Press sort of keeps us a little preoccupied. And how are you, Colette?
I'm doing relatively well. I'm holding up, and I draw great inspiration from you all and from our activists around the country. So thank you for everything that you're doing. And I do want to note that, right now, this week rather, marks 1 year for all of us since we really began experiencing the stay-at-home orders and the real ways that the COVID-19 public health emergency has changed everyday life. and of course, much of the grief and anxiety and uncertainty that it's brought with it. And so I just definitely want to say to folks who are watching that we're with you, we're thinking about you, and just encouraging everyone to take good care of yourselves. Part of taking good care, though, is access to basic services. And Dana, I know you've been working with the No Shutoffs Coalition, which is a group, I believe, that came together last year around this time to advocate for a federal moratorium on utility shutoffs. Could you tell us a little bit more about what that coalition is and what they're asking Congress to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So the No Shutoffs Coalition is a partnership between groups that fight for broadband justice, like Free Press, as well as groups that fight for power justice and water justice. So this coalition has been led by groups including Free Press, but also including Food and Water Watch, the Center for Biological Diversity, Corporate Accountability, the Partnership for Southern Equity, and the Democracy Collaborative, and has also included hundreds of other groups that have jumped on, signed on to letters, called on the administration, called on Congress to really engage and to stop utilities such as water, broadband, and power from being shut off for people who can't afford to pay their bills during this pandemic. That's really what this coalition sort of formed around, was this idea that during the pandemic, we've seen so many people are finding it harder than ever to pay their bills. People are seeing unprecedented job and income losses that make it extremely difficult to keep up with those monthly payments. And we've also seen that these essential services have become even more critical. You need to have running water in your home in order to wash your hands and protect yourself from COVID-19. You need power and you need broadband in order to connect to remote work or remote schooling, or now to make your vaccine appointments online. These are really critical, essential human services. And we've been calling for this for a year. We've seen some tremendous successes. We've seen the House actually pass legislation several times that included a federal moratorium saying, hey, internet service providers, power companies, water utilities, you can't shut off people's services right now. Even if they can't pay their bills, you need to make sure that people can maintain this critical access. It's really an issue. It's a human rights issue to be able to maintain these basic and essential services. We haven't seen that legislation make it all the way. And that's something that we're really calling on. And the No Shutoffs Coalition is really focusing on trying to lift up and say, this is something we really need in this emergency.
Absolutely. And I'm so grateful for your work, Dana, along with that coalition. And you're right, it's a human rights issue and it's a racial justice issue, because we know that communities of color are disproportionately impacted when we talk about wealth inequality and various pay gaps, as well as the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, rates of mortality, rates of job loss, et cetera, all around. We know that this pandemic has been even more impactful for communities of color. And then that means when you're talking about a moratorium, those communities need it most. So I'm really, really thankful for the work that you're doing. And I think, I want to bring in Leo, because I know that this conversation of broadband as a basic necessity, internet access as something fundamental to daily life is not new. And something that, has been addressed in the past via the Lifeline program, which provides a subsidy. And some people may be listening to this conversation and to ask for Congress to enact a moratorium and may be wondering, well, what can the FCC do? I know the FCC had a voluntary no shutoffs pledge, but that was only for 2 months. What's the story right now at the FCC as a federal agency, with actually some level of ability in this problem that we have going on?
Sure. Thanks, Colette. I think what's unfortunate is the FCC needs to balance three really big buckets. They're all equally important. And they're stuck with this problem largely because of what the last administration essentially left them with. So the first big bucket is going to be a look back at the past administration's very terrible attempts to deregulate, no matter what the cost is. You mentioned the Lifeline program. We've been longtime advocates for the Lifeline program, and there have been many efforts by the last administration to either undermine or directly attack the program. Sometimes some of the more subtle attacks took the form of attacks that we've seen in other contexts for any sort of aid to low-income people. Like, for instance, we're setting a lifetime to the benefit so that you can only use it for a certain number of years, and then after that, you're no longer eligible to collect the benefit. And that's just in the Lifeline context. So there's going to be a need to look back and roll back a lot of the other attacks on the program. I'll give you another example. There was this Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, which is essentially going to be $20 billion sent to all of these rural places, unserved rural places, to bring broadband to them. And our researcher, Derek Turner, has actually uncovered a lot of issues with this program. This is what could have been this amazing opportunity to connect people in rural places, whether in Georgia or Kansas, to have broadband internet. We're now seeing that, hey, there's some companies like Elon Musk Starlink that are getting almost $1 billion to deploy, and there's some questionable questions around that. The second big bucket is going to be responding to COVID. As you probably discussed, I think 2 weeks ago here with my colleagues, Matt and Dana, the commission is going to have to essentially be watching all the developments with Lifeline, all the developments with EBB, the Emergency Broadband Benefit, and watching what's going on with the needs of low-income people. And they have to adjust those programs on the fly to make sure that they're tailored to the needs of folks as we weather, hopefully, the tail end of this pandemic, but also the economic recovery that's going to be happening. We've seen a lot of large several stimuluses. There's a lot of uncertainty about folks' economic future going forward, and the FCC needs to be able to respond. So not just ensure that they waive certain rules as they've already done, but also act affirmatively to find out what are the needs of folks. And part of that is going to center largely on interagency cooperation. And I won't go into the details of that, but particularly the Biden administration could pull together, make sure that every branch of the government knows what every other branch is doing. So in the example of the Emergency Broadband Benefit, the folks distributing SNAP and signing folks up for SNAP should know about the Emergency Broadband Benefit so that they can simultaneously inform someone, hey, you're approved for SNAP, but you're also approved for this $50 a month benefit that could be applied to your internet to help you remain connected throughout the pandemic. And then the other thing would be working with groups, advocacy groups, but especially direct service providers, those organizations, shelters, and other folks who are sort of working on the ground and directly interface with low-income and very vulnerable communities, and make sure that they know about the program. So this is a brand new program, as my colleagues had discussed, and it's going to be very critical that the people who need it most know about it and can take advantage of it. And that's going to require a public-private partnerships. And then the last point, and I think I hope you can imagine, the FCC has a lot. I think I've tried to encapsulate. The third big bucket is looking to the future, which essentially is going to be rely very critically on the next point you probably raise either today, if not, then maybe your next question. But it's going to rest on whether we get a fifth commissioner in control of the commission.
Gotcha. That's a really good roundup, Leo. Thank you for laying that out. I think that we're all looking for great things from the Biden FCC, after having survived the Trump FCC. And we're hoping for this agency to really make a difference on the digital divide and many other issues of communications, right? So I really appreciate you sort of going in depth there to let us know, what the FCC can do right now, especially some of those points around the public rollout of these benefits. And so, yes, I do want to talk a little bit about the fifth commissioner. Thank you for that preview and segue, Leo, because I think right now the FCC has its hands tied in many ways because of the fact that it is at a 2-2 deadlock with 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans on that commission. And so, I wanted to ask, you mentioned public-private partnership. First of all, the public sector has to get its stuff together. What can the Biden administration do? What can Congress do? What have they done? Has there been anything promising on that front? And I would kick that question to either of you. Maybe I'll start with Dana.
Yeah, well, I think some of this Leo's even already laid out. I think a tremendous victory that we've seen, and we've seen come through even this deadlocked FCC, is the agency starting to implement the emergency broadband program, which was passed by Congress, and that in and of itself was a tremendous victory. And we're seeing that this FCC has been moving forward as quickly as possible to try to implement it. This program could have been implemented long ago and should have been, but Congress failed to pass that bill all the way through. And so now we're certainly very pleased to see this FCC really hitting the ground running and trying to get this program moving. So that is very encouraging to see. But this is also the emergency broadband benefit. There's tremendous potential to help people get connected, particularly, as you mentioned, low-income communities, communities of color that are already disproportionately more likely to be disconnected than their wealthier or white counterparts. That's a problem that has existed in this country for a long time. The COVID-19 pandemic has made those gaps starker and has also, in many cases, made them harder for families that are already struggling to afford this connectivity. The emergency benefit has the potential to help a lot of people get connected in this moment of crisis. But we also need to be looking further down the road. We still need a federal moratorium on these utility shutoffs for people who are already struggling to pay those bills. We need something to make sure that under no circumstances will you lose access to this essential service. But there's so many other things that we need the Biden FCC as well as this Congress to do. And one of my favorites always to come back and talk about is that we really need the FCC to be able to have Title II authority, which is sort of a wonky word, but essentially just means that the FCC needs to have the legal authority to say, hey, we're going to really look at the broadband market. We're going to try to figure out if it's working for people. And if it's not, how it's not. And if it's not, what do we do about it? It is able to protect against discrimination. It allows the FCC to look at prices and say, are these just and reasonable? Are these practices that internet service providers are taking in the market, are they reasonable and fair? We need that kind of authority, and the last FCC got rid of that authority. And that's still a very contentious argument in DC about whether or not we should restore this Title II authority. Getting a fifth commissioner who is supportive of Title II would be a tremendous help to not just move forward more of these emergency and necessary processes, establishing a federal moratorium, taking care of a lot of the tasks that Leo mentioned, but also looking forward at actually building a more equitable broadband system. We really need a fifth commissioner to help restore Title II.
And I would just to dovetail onto that before maybe raising some other issues. I think the Title II debate is so important. All my colleagues, we all, in one way or another, do work on advocacy around restoring Title II, but in so many other disparate areas, like network resiliency, so making sure that networks don't fail during a natural disaster, or in even the Lifeline program itself, we keep running into this question about how the trying to figure out how to make the void that was left by an FCC affirmatively stepping out of a space and saying, it's now a free-for-all for you all. And it's just so critical. It's just, I don't know how many issues that I run into that I keep thinking back, we need to restore Title II. So not just with I think those need to be simultaneous goals for us, for sure. Getting a fifth commissioner and restoring Title II.
Absolutely. And for folks who joined Free Press in the net neutrality fight, perhaps maybe some years ago or in recent years, Title II may sound familiar because that also gave the FCC the authority to ensure that internet service providers don't pick winners and losers when it comes to online content. So, we have a number of reasons why we know that Title II authority is critical for the FCC to have in order to protect consumers and protect communities and people who use the internet and have a right to basic communication services. So, speaking of net neutrality, there was a really huge fight for that for many, many years, back and forth. And we know that the Trump FCC tried to take it away permanently, but there's always another chapter in the story. And one of the pieces of language during that fight that was very popular was battle for the net. In fact, it was also the online home for net neutrality activists. And I heard that battle for the net is back. With regard to the current fight for Title II authority at the FCC and our fight to close the digital divide during this pandemic and beyond. Is that rumor right? Is Battle for the Net back?
Yeah, the rumors are true. Battle for the Net is back up and is still focused, I think, on that fight too of restoring net neutrality, right? We won strong net neutrality rules in 2015, and then we lost them in this last administration. That loss does not have to be permanent, and that's really why Battle for the Net is coming back stronger than ever to push for getting Title II authority back so that we can restore those strong net neutrality rules, but also so that we can have an empowered agency with a full toolbox that can look at the digital divide and say, how can we fix this? How can we make sure that everyone can get online, that everyone can afford to get online, that there's not racial discrimination or other kinds of discrimination happening in this market? How can we protect people's privacy? There's really, I think, as Leo mentioned, Title II connects to so many different things. If you want the FCC to do something about the internet, chances are they would be better equipped to do it if they had Title II authority. And that's what Battle for the Net has come back for, is to say, all right, we have a new administration. We have new folks leading this agency. It is time to get the band back together and to really mobilize our communities to say, we really cared about net neutrality. We still really care about net neutrality. And also we care about all the things that this agency could do to make the internet work for people if it had this strong legal authority to act. So that's definitely, if folks are interested in getting loud about this again and in getting this really critical authority back, you can go to Battle for the Net and be directed towards a lot of those important actions that you can take.
And I do want to jump in really quick. I mean, having followed this, I was actually once at the FCC when the proceedings were the open internet proceedings. And so I've been keeping an eye on this since at least 2010. And then from the outside until I finally joined Free Press, been able to been along with the journey and the advocacy. And I think one of the biggest frustrating and most challenging things is, the side that wants to monetize your streams and everything else. They have their corporations that don't sleep, they don't eat, they don't get tired, they don't lose attention. They can work on these multi-decade initiatives. They have their trade associations and lobbyists. They don't tire, and they've been pushing this initiative of, oh, this has been going on for so long, and maybe there's like some sort of fatigue. But I mean, I think it's just like anything else, any issue that touches on someone's rights, and when the corporations want to take it away from you, we gotta stick with it and keep on fighting. So I'm actually really glad to see the website back up again.
Absolutely. I'm with you, Leo. We have to stick with it and keep fighting, understanding that the fight for broadband access and affordability, the fight for net neutrality, all of these fights are fundamental to our fights for human rights, for a just society and a functioning democracy. And so as long as we're continuing the fight, for the kind of future we think we deserve, that all of these fights are worth sticking with and keeping going. So I'm so glad that, you all also don't sleep. No, I'm kidding. I don't want that. I don't want you all to not sleep. I want y'all to sleep. But I'm so glad that you're making sure our voices as communities continue to be heard even as lobbyists for, telecom industry try to silence us. Really appreciate your work, Dana and Leo. What can activists do, just real quickly before we go? We did place the link for battleforthenet.com in the comments if you're watching on Facebook Live or YouTube Live. Make sure you jump into the comments and let us know where you're tuning in from before we go today. But we shared that link so that if you're watching and you want to take action, that's one easy way. How can folks get involved with the No Shutoffs Coalition and conversation, Dana?
I think often the easiest way is just start talking about it. Hashtag No Shutoffs on Twitter. Start raising this issue. Start making it clear to the Biden administration, to your congressional representatives, to folks at the FCC, to anyone that you can raise this profile and say, this is a really important issue and people are paying attention. There's often this narrative that, regular people don't care about tech or their internet in the same way. And that's absolutely not true. Everybody cares about their essential services. And I think really making sure that policymakers know that they know you're paying attention is a really critical part of this fight.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Dana, any parting words, Leo?
Yeah, just a couple quick thoughts. I mean, I think the evergreen advice I always give is keep an eye out for communications from us. We're from Free Press. We're going to let you know if there's a legislation that needs to be advocated for, or a rulemaking at the FCC, terminating these bad lifeline proceedings that started in the last administration. And as someone who it takes a great joy in looking and reviewing these dockets, I do spend a lot of time reading folks' comments, and some of these stories I think are really important for folks to share. So please stay engaged there. But I would also say, if you know a shelter or if you know a direct service organization, and if you mention this emergency broadband benefit and they have a blank stare in their face, please try to connect them with us or give them the information about the program, because ideally we would have the government come in and just sort of let everybody know immediately. But this is a brand new program, it's ramping up. It's going to also rely on word of mouth. So to the extent that people can let their relatives, loved ones, or anybody they're interfacing with that might be providing services to direct service providers for low-income communities. And I would also be remiss to say that, I'm not just sad, but angry about the terrible news from this morning. And I obviously want to send my deepest regrets. But if people, like me, are scared, frustrated, and angry, whatever the motives of the horrendous act, whatever people are feeling are very valid, because it did not occur in a vacuum. It was something that was manufactured. And it's certainly something that I feel grateful to work in an organization where we might have the tools or the allies to fight against it. So I just wanted to say that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Leo. We definitely condemn and are horrified by the acts of violence against Asian American folks in Atlanta and really across the country, and really appreciate you lifting that up, Leo, because I think even when we're talking about communications, it's really about us having the ability to tell our story, to fight against the dehumanization of our folks, and to change society and culture in a way where this kind of violence isn't happening anymore. So we definitely want to hold those victims and the families and communities in our thoughts here on Free Press Live. Appreciate you, Leo. Appreciate you, Dana, and all of the folks who are taking part in the fights for justice and for a better future. Thank you for being here with us. We are here every week on Wednesday at 2:30 p.m. And if you're looking for a way to plug in with us, or even to get in contact with your Congress members so that you can make sure that there is an open and vital internet that everyone can have access to be able to raise their voices against violence and in support of a safe community where we all can thrive, you can visit freepress.net. We have instructions and tools there to help you understand what you can do to get in contact with your policymakers, or also just links for you to be able to take action. And we hope that you'll join us again at freepress.net and here every Wednesday on Facebook and YouTube Live for Free Press Live. Thank you so much, Dana and Leo, and our technical director, Candace Clement, and we'll see you all next week.